The dungeon loomed before them, its entrance a jagged maw of stone and shadow. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed from within. Above, the sky was a bruised purple, the sun setting behind the jagged peaks of the Eldergrove Mountains. The three adventurers stood at the threshold, their breath visible in the chill evening air. Kale the swordsman adjusted the grip on his longsword. His armor, though worn, gleamed faintly in the fading light. He was a man of few words, his sharp eyes scanning the entrance for any sign of danger. Beside him, Lyra, the mage, clutched her staff tightly. Her robes, embroidered with arcane symbols, fluttered in the breeze. Her expression was calm, but her knuckles were white against the polished wood of her staff. Lastly, there was Aemon, the healer. His hands rested on the hilt of a small mace at his belt, and his satchel of herbs and potions hung heavily at his side. His face was pale, but his resolve was steady. "This is it," Cal said, his voice low. "The tomb of Azaroth. If the legends are true, the relic we seek is deep inside." Lyra nodded. "The wards around this place are ancient, but they're still active. We'll need to be careful." Aemon swallowed hard. "Let's just hope we're not too late." The three of them stepped into the dungeon, the darkness swallowing them whole. The first chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were lined with crumbling statues, their faces worn smooth by time. The floor was littered with debris, broken pottery, shattered bones, and the remnants of old adventuring gear. A faint, eerie glow emanated from cracks in the stone, casting the room in an otherworldly light. Kyle led the way, his sword at the ready. Lyra followed close behind, her staff glowing faintly as she channeled a light spell. Aemon brought up the rear, his eyes darting nervously to every shadow. "Stay close," Kyle muttered. "This place is a maze." They moved deeper into the dungeon, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The air grew colder, and the walls seemed to close in around them. Strange symbols were carved into the stone, their meanings lost to time. Lyra paused to examine them, her fingers tracing the grooves. "These are protective runes," she said, "but they've been corrupted. Something dark has been here." "What kind of something?" Aemon asked, his voice trembling. Lyra shook her head. "I'm not sure, but we'll find out soon enough." As they ventured further, the dungeon began to change. The walls became slick with moisture, and the air grew heavy with the scent of mildew. The faint sound of dripping water grew louder, and the glow from the cracks in the stone dimmed, plunging them into near darkness. Cal stopped abruptly, holding up a hand. "Do you hear that?" The others froze. At first there was nothing, then faintly they heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from somewhere ahead. "Stay behind me," Cal said, his grip tightening on his sword. They moved forward cautiously, the growl growing louder with each step. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, its floor covered in a shallow pool of water. In the center of the room stood a massive creature, its hunched form illuminated by the faint glow of the runes. It was a troll, its skin a mottled green, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Its claws were long and sharp, and its teeth were bared in a snarl. It hadn't noticed them yet, but it was only a matter of time. Kale glanced back at the others. "Ready?" Lyra nodded, her staff glowing brighter as she prepared a spell. Aemon gripped his mace, his face pale but determined. Kale stepped into the chamber, his boots splashing in the water. The troll's head snapped up, its eyes locking onto him. With a roar, it charged. Kale met the troll head-on, his sword flashing in the dim light. The creature's claws raked against his armor, but he held his ground, driving his blade into its side. The troll roared in pain, its blood splattering the ground. Lyra raised her staff, chanting under her breath. A bolt of lightning shot from the tip, striking the troll in the chest. It staggered back, its flesh sizzling, but it wasn't enough to bring it down. Aemon hung back, his hands glowing with healing energy. He watched Kale closely, ready to mend any wounds the swordsman sustained. The troll swung its massive arm, catching Kale in the chest and sending him sprawling. He hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. The troll loomed over him, its claws raised for the killing blow. "Kyle!" Aemon shouted, rushing forward. He slammed his mace into the troll's leg, the holy energy imbued in the weapon searing its flesh. The creature howled, turning its attention to the healer. Kyle seized the opportunity, driving his sword into the troll's back. Lyra unleashed another spell, this time a burst of fire that engulfed the creature. It let out a final, agonized roar before collapsing to the ground, its body twitching as the life left it. Kyle leaned on his sword, breathing heavily. That was too close. Eamon knelt beside him, his hands glowing as he healed the worst of Kale's injuries. We need to be more careful. This place is full of dangers. Lyra nodded, her expression grim. The deeper we go, the worse it will get. After the battle with the troll, the trio pressed on, their nerves frayed but their determination unshaken. The dungeon's corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, and the faint sound of whispers began to echo through the halls. They came to a large chamber, its walls covered in intricate carvings. In the center of the room stood a massive stone door, sealed shut. The door was covered in glowing runes, and a series of levers and switches were embedded in the wall beside it. The floor was tiled with large, uneven stones, some of which seemed to shift slightly underfoot. Lyra approached the door, her staff glowing as she examined the runes. This is a puzzle. We need to activate the switches in the correct order to open the door. Kyle frowned. And if we get it wrong? Lyra's expression was grim. Let's not find out. The three of them studied the runes and switches, trying to decipher the pattern. Eamon noticed a series of symbols that matched the carvings on the walls. Look, these symbols correspond to the ones on the walls. Maybe we need to match them. Lyra nodded. Good eye. Let's try it. They worked together, pulling the switches in the order they believed was correct. As the final switch was activated, the runes on the door flared brightly. But instead of opening, the door remained sealed. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and the floor beneath them began to shift. What's happening? Eamon asked, his voice tinged with panic. Lyra's eyes widened. We triggered a trap. The floor is collapsing. The tiles beneath their feet began to give way, revealing a dark abyss below. Kyle grabbed Lyra and Eamon, pulling them back just as the section of floor they were standing on crumbled away. They scrambled to the edge of the chamber, their hearts pounding. We need to try again, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the danger. But this time, we need to be sure. Eamon pointed to a series of runes near the ceiling. Look, those symbols are different. Maybe they're the key. Lyra followed his gaze and nodded. You're right. The pattern is inverted. We need to pull the switches in the reverse order. They moved quickly, pulling the switches in the new sequence. This time, the runes on the door glowed brightly, and the stone door began to grind open. The rumbling stopped, and the floor stabilized. Cal let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. That was too close. Eamon wiped sweat from his brow. Let's not do that again. Lyra managed a small smile. Agreed. Let's keep moving. Beyond the door, they found themselves in a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. The walls were lined with ancient relics and treasures, but their attention was drawn to the center of the room, where a massive stone statue stood. The statue depicted a fearsome warrior, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. As they approached, the statue began to move, its stone form cracking and shifting as it came to life. The guardian raised its massive sword, its eyes locking onto the intruders. Get ready, Kyle shouted, raising his sword. Eamon quickly chanted a spell, his hands glowing as he cast a minor strength buff on Kyle. This should help you hit harder. Lyra raised her staff, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. This thing won't feel pain, and it's resistant to magic. We need to find another way. The guardian charged, its massive sword swinging down with incredible force. Kyle barely managed to block the blow, the impact sending him skidding back. Lyra unleashed a barrage of spells, but the guardian's stone form absorbed the magic with little effect. It's too strong, Kyle shouted, dodging another swing of the guardian's sword. Lyra's eyes lit up with an idea. I'll try to hold it in place. Eamon, protect me. Eamon nodded, casting a protection spell on Lyra to lessen the damage she might take. Lyra raised her staff, chanting an incantation. Vines and roots burst from the ground, wrapping around the guardian's legs and arms. The creature roared, struggling against the bindings. Now, Kale! Lyra shouted. Kale rushed forward, his sword glowing with the strength buff Aemon had cast. He swung with all his might, striking the Guardian's chest. The blade bit into the stone, creating a deep crack. But the Guardian shrugged off the damage, breaking free of the roots with a powerful roar. "It's not enough," Kyle shouted, dodging another swing of the Guardian's sword. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "The crack in its chest. I can exploit that." She raised her staff, chanting another spell. A glowing orb of energy formed at the tip of her staff, growing brighter and brighter. With a cry, she hurled it at the Guardian. The orb struck the crack in the creature's chest, exploding with a deafening blast. The Guardian staggered, its stone form cracking and crumbling. With a final, agonized roar, it collapsed to the ground, its body shattering into pieces. Kale leaned on his sword, his chest heaving. "That thing didn't even flinch. If it hadn't been for your spell, Lyra, we'd be dust right now." Lyra sank to her knees, her staff clattering to the ground. She wiped sweat from her brow, her hands trembling. "I've never seen anything like it. Stone shouldn't move like that. It shouldn't fight like that." Aemon knelt beside her, his hands glowing faintly as he channeled healing energy into her. "You pushed yourself too hard. That spell took a lot out of you." Lyra shook her head, though her exhaustion was evident. "We didn't have a choice. If we hadn't stopped it, we'd be dead. But I don't like this. That Guardian wasn't just a construct. It felt alive, like it was thinking." Kyle frowned, his grip tightening on his sword. "You're saying it was sentient?" "I don't know," Lyra admitted. "But something about this place isn't right. The deeper we go, the more it feels like we're not just fighting monsters. We're fighting the dungeon itself." Aemon stood, his face pale but determined. "Then we need to be smarter, faster, stronger. Whatever's waiting for us down here, it's not going to give us a second chance." Kale nodded, his expression grim. "Agreed, but we're not turning back. Not now." Lyra pushed herself to her feet, leaning heavily on her staff. "Close, but let's not pretend this is going to get easier. That thing," she gestured to the shattered remains of the Guardian, "was just the beginning." Aemon glanced at the dark corridor ahead, his voice quiet but steady. "Then we'd better be ready for whatever comes next." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their journey pressing down on them. Then, without another word, they pressed on, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence of the dungeon. They pressed on, the dungeon growing darker and more oppressive with each step. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the earth. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, and the faint sound of whispers echoed through the halls. Finally, they reached the heart of the dungeon, a massive chamber filled with ancient relics and treasures. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested the object of their quest, the Relic of Azaroth. It was a small, ornate box, its surface covered in intricate carvings. It pulsed with a faint, ominous light, and the air around it seemed to hum with energy. Lyra approached it cautiously, her staff raised. "This is it, but something's wrong." Kyle frowned. "What do you mean?" "The relic. It's corrupted. The dark energy we've been sensing. It's coming from this." Before they could react, the ground beneath them began to shake. The walls of the chamber cracked, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Shadows began to coalesce around the relic, forming into a towering figure of darkness. "We've awakened it," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "The guardian of the relic." The shadowy figure lunged at them, its form shifting and writhing. Kel met it with his sword, but the blade passed through it as if it were smoke. Lyra unleashed a barrage of spells, but they had little effect. Aemon grabbed the relic, his hands burning as he touched it. "We need to destroy it. It's the only way to stop this." Lyra nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Do it!" Aemon raised the relic high, then brought it down with all his strength. The box shattered, the dark energy within exploding outward in a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, the shadowy figure was gone. The chamber was silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. The relic lay in pieces at Aemon's feet, its power extinguished. Cal sheathed his sword, his expression grim. It's over. Lyra sank to her knees, her staff clattering to the ground. We did it, but at what cost? Eamon looked down at his hands, which were still glowing faintly. The relic's energy, it's inside me. I can feel it. Kyle placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll figure it out, together. The three of them made their way back to the surface, the weight of their journey heavy on their shoulders. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the cost had been high. And as they stepped into the light of the rising sun, they knew their lives would never be the same.